Well, since everybody else feels compelled to keep talking about violent video games, I might as well too. Hey! Hi, how you doing? This is the Gamertron, and welcome back to the Gamertron Show. Now, if you haven't watched part 1 of the old violent video games debate, you really should watch part 1 before part 2. Link in the description and in the comments section. But now, let's continue. Where were we last time? Oh yeah, the APA, stating that violent video games cause aggression, me pointing out how media in general causes aggression, but aggression doesn't always lead to violence, it's people's choices that lead to violence. How if parents don't want their kids exposed to violent video games, maybe they should act like actual bloody parents and actually parent their kids instead of blaming the media for their child being exposed to violence or acting violently. Now I basically just summed up part 1 there, but I really think you should watch part 1 and get the nitty-gritty details. But to continue onward from that, now to state once again, violent video games can cause aggression, but non-violent video games can cause aggression too. Just like how getting drunk, or watching or playing a sport you're passionate about can get you angry and aggressive. Hell, yoga can make people aggressive. You know what gets me aggressive and angry? Commercials. I hate commercials. Or at least the really bad or really silly commercials. I hate commercials. I hate stupid commercials. You guys want to know what makes me angry and aggressive? It's not violent video games, it's not violent media, it's commercials. But that's the kind of person I am. Commercials make me aggressive, make me angry. Violent video games don't. That's the kind of person who I am. Aggression, anger, emotions. What you feel and who you are as a person is determined by, well, who you are as a person. But hey, I'm just repeating myself from last video. I just want to make sure that point gets across. Violence is caused by people, not violent media. However, in part 1, I focused solely on violent media. I was focusing on the stuff around violent video games. I was focusing on everything that goes on around it. I was talking about the human element and not about the element, well, that's in the title, violent video games. Let's talk about violent video games. What makes a violent video game different from a violent movie, or a violent novel, or a violent comic book, or a violent play? Why is it violent video games get so many people up and about and outraged? Why is it violent video games? Why not the other forms of violence in the media? Why is it specifically video games that get to people, or at least the ignorant or non-gamers who have never touched a video game? Well, let's be honest here. Violent video games do have something that all the other violent medias don't. That, well, you are an actual part of the violence. In many cases, you are the instigator of the violence. No other medium lets you do that, but then again, that's one of the amazing things about video games, that you're able to do reckless and dangerous and violent things that you can't do in real life, that you can't do in your own life, but you do in video games. And because you perform violence in video games, and because you perform violence in violent video games, people assume that you are a violent person, or that these video games make you a violent person, where that's not the case. Believe it or not, a majority of gamers, yes, I know there's a ton of popular internet videos that show off very angry gamers, and gamers acting violently and angry. I want to say, those people are a minority. And while those gamers are indeed angry because of a video game, it's not the video game that's making them throw their keyboard or their controller or smash things or yell. I've gotten angry while playing video games. I've never done any of that. If anything, the most I've ever done is got up, go to my refrigerator, grab a bottle of water. Yes, I once got so angry at a video game that I became thirsty with rage. These gamers who are angry and are acting violently, that's just the kind of people they are. It's not the cause of the video game. The video game caused the anger, but it didn't cause them to do that violent behavior. They are choosing to do that. As a person, you are responsible for your own choices and your own actions. And look, as I was going to say before I got off topic, most gamers I know personally, as acquaintances, and those I've never actually met before, but I know of, are not violent people. If anything, violence scares the shit out of them. Violence scares the shit out of me, and I play a ton of violent video games, and violence scares the shit out of me. I once saw a news report of a kamikaze bombing attack in the Middle East. I apologize, I can't remember the specific details. And actually, nor do I want to. I remember a news report. I remember this so vividly. A news report of a kamikaze bomber going off in a crowd of people and then showing the aftermath, seeing bloody people messed up, burned, hurt. I wanted to vomit. I needed to go to the bathroom because I felt like I needed to vomit. I am horrified by real-world violence. I am disgusted by real-world violence. And I play a ton of bloody and gory violent video games. And yet, they don't cause me nightmares. They don't make me disturbed. They don't make me want to vomit. That news report, however, of that kamikaze bombing attack in the Middle East, and I know there's so many that go on, but this news report was very, specific and showed a lot of details and horrific scenes. That scared, disgusted, and horrified the shit out of me. And again, I've played violent video games such as Mortal Kombat, Doom, Wolfenstein, Grand Theft Auto. You don't see me pulling any of the violent shit I do in those video games, because the thing about violence in video games is that 90, maybe 99% of violence in video games is unrealistic, fantastical, and cartoony. Human bodies do not react that way to getting punched, shot, or stabbed. The reason I enjoy and am entertained by video game violence is because of how almost not violent they are. How implausible the violence is. The blood, the gore, the dismemberment, the ragdoll effects that can be found in video games. They're so unrealistic, fantastical, and cartoony that it's impossible for me to feel horrified or disgusted, because it is just so far away from the real deal. I remember a news report where a shooter stated that he learned how to use guns by playing Call of Duty. That's bullshit. This killer, this scumbag, was using video games as an excuse for his violence. He was looking for a scapegoat, something that people would maybe feel pity for him, or get a lighter sentence in court. I don't know. The point is, that is bullshit. You cannot learn how to use a gun, how to be like a soldier. You cannot train to be like a soldier by playing Call of Duty, or Battlefield, or any other military first-person shooter game. Because any military expert, any actual real-world soldier, will tell you that Call of Duty is beyond unrealistic. They'll tell you the guns don't shoot the way they should. The recoil, the fire rate, the bullet drop-off, it's all wrong. They'll tell you that your character reloads his gun improperly. That they're either reloading the gun in an inefficient way, they're reloading it way too slow, or way too fast, or, best yet, they're reloading the weapon in such a way that is not plausible with the weapon in their hands. Oh, one of my favorite complaints from military experts and soldiers about video games like Call of Duty and Battlefield, it's how the playable characters hold the guns. Any military expert or soldier, again, I sound like a broken record here, I'm well aware, will tell you that the playable characters in many first-person shooter games, Call of Duty and Battlefield included, hold the guns wrong. So, when a psychotic, evil son of a bitch who goes around shooting people says he learned to do it from Call of Duty, he's full of shit. Now then, I really don't want to do this, but I'm gonna have to. Let's play devil's advocate, just for a bit. And let's examine some violent video games that may not necessarily do violence in the most tasteful of ways. Let's look at one of the most heavy hitters, Grand Theft Auto. Now, let's go off right off the bat. I am biased. I am biased when talking about Grand Theft Auto because I'm not a fan of Grand Theft Auto. I honestly just don't like the games. I don't find them fun. They're not for me. But again, that's just me. That's just my personal opinion. I'm not a Grand Theft Auto person. I don't enjoy the video games. That's just me. And one of the reasons is how Grand Theft Auto handles violence. Now, right off the bat, a majority of Grand Theft Auto's violence is unrealistic. I'll say that right off the bat. A majority of Grand Theft Auto's violence is unrealistic. But there are certain segments in every single one of the games where certain scenes are unnecessarily realistically violent. There are points in the Grand Theft Auto games where they are being violent not for the sake of entertainment, but to start controversy, to be controversial, where it's not so much about entertaining the player as it is getting media headlines. Any press is good press, as they say. While that's true, it is kind of iffy that you need to push the boundaries and be violent for the sake of just grabbing media headlines instead of just presenting a good game. I know the video game industry is a harsh industry, and you have to do everything you can to get actual media attention and get your game to sell. And sometimes just being a good video game isn't enough. I understand that. That doesn't make it any less, at least a tiny bit shameful. And then we have a game like Hatred. Screw Hatred. Hatred is a game that's all about its premise and its shock value, trying to make it sell copies. Because in this game, you play as a mass murderer, a killer. Where other games may have you play as villains, criminals, evil individuals, Hatred has you playing as one of the most disgusting creatures on Earth. Now, while Hatred's gameplay is indeed unrealistic, at least a good portion of it, the premise and setting isn't unrealistic. There are psychopaths out there who go on mass shootings and killing sprees. And with games like Hatred, I can understand why the ignorant to video games would get upset and would blame video games for violence. Guys, I'm sorry, but this style of video game, this premise and setting is completely distasteful. It's distasteful and it is offensive. Look, I'm not talking about the game or the gameplay itself. I'm talking about the premise and setting of the game. It's unnecessary, and the whole point of this extremely dark and violent premise and setting is just for the media headlines, just to cause controversy, and that's a bit despicable. And I can understand people getting upset over Hatred and the violence presented, because it is extremely distasteful and offensive. Especially, this game is so offensive to people who have actually been in mass shootings, who have been in a shootout, who have had gunfire fly over their heads while a psychopath shoots in every direction and maybe engages into a gun battle with cops. That's terrifying, that's horrific, and it doesn't need to have a video game based on that premise. Now, on the topic of games that aren't necessarily tasteful, let's talk about the Call of Duty and Battlefield games. Let's talk about modern military soldier shooters, where you play as a military soldier in present day, modern times, maybe sometime in the future. But for the most part, it's set in a more present day, kind of realistic setting. While the games themselves aren't realistic, their plots and gameplay, the settings, however, are warfare, war, soldier versus soldier, especially that of the American soldier. Now, whether the Call of Duty and Battlefield games are disrespectful or honor the military, that's a really split debate all on its own. There have been soldiers that have come out and stated that they do not feel offended by these video games whatsoever, while others have come out and say they are offended by such games. And admittedly, I personally am not offended by the settings of these modern military shooter games. I have to admit, I always prefer the fantastical kinds of games, the sci-fi shooters, the sci-fi fantasy shooters, the plain-out fantasy shooters. I will admit I prefer those, and maybe playing as an American soldier could be offensive to an American soldier. I can see that happening, but society, or at least a majority of society, doesn't seem to take offense to it, so maybe that's forgivable. Maybe it is the unrealism and the cartoonist nature of these shooters, of Battlefield, of Call of Duty. Maybe it's because there's so much unrealism to them that They can be forgiven if their setting and premise about soldiers in war, present-day soldiers in war, and even World War II shooters. You know, the old-school World War II military shooters where you'd play as a variety of different soldiers from a variety of different countries fighting the Nazis. Maybe the action movie quality, the silly, goofy action movie quality of these military shooters is what makes them so inoffensive to society at large. Hey, if we can have hundreds of books and hundreds of movies about soldiers and make them exciting blockbuster action movies, I don't see why video games can't do the same. Whew, now to stop playing devil's advocate, violence in video games overall, a majority of the time, is outlandish, cartoony, unrealistic. And again, that's what I love about it. I am disgusted and horrified by real-world violence, as I've stated before earlier in the video. But I can see why some people who have gone through real-world violence, who've experienced the terror of real-world violence, could be offended by a form of media, a movie, a book, or a video game emulating that kind of violence when they've been through it. I can understand a soldier getting offended by Call of Duty or Battlefield. I can understand a victim or survivor of a mass shooting or serial killing or murder rampage, whatever. I can understand them getting offended by hatred. I'm offended by hatred. Everybody should be offended by hatred. One, because it's a terrible game and its premise is completely distasteful, and I can also understand why someone would get offended by a game like Grand Theft Auto, because there are people out there who have lost their lives or had their lives damaged or lost loved ones to criminals, to madmen, to sick, rich, evil sons of bitches who think the world is their playground and they can hurt whoever. Where, let's be honest here, in the Grand Theft Auto games, you usually play as these kind of criminals who think they're untouchable, that they can do and hurt whoever they want. And there are people out there who have suffered to those kinds of people, so I can understand a certain group's, a specific type of person who has gone through violent events in their lives, and I can see why a media emulating that would be offensive. However, to be offended by violent video games such as Doom, or Wolfenstein, or Fallout, or Skyrim, or Borderlands, or Mass Effect, or Halo, or any sort of video game with blood, gore, fantastical, unrealistic violence, to be offended by that is nonsensical. 'Cause the violence presented in those video games is in a sci-fi fantasy world. It's impossible for that violence to be transpired or emulated in the real world. Anyone who was offended by the violence shown in these sci-fi fantasy video games, again, Doom, Mass Effect, Dragon Age, The Witcher, Skyrim, Fallout, anyone who gets offended by the violence in those games, well, I'm sorry to be rude, but you're a nitwit, and you have a real problem discerning the important from the unimportant. I don't see how brutally and bloody killing aliens and demons and monsters and just fictional characters, I don't see how killing fictional characters in violent ways is offensive. They're fictional. If I cut off a dragon's head in a video game, I just cut off the head of a non-existent creature. If I set a demon on fire and blow him to bloody bits, fuck him! He was a demon! He was non-existent! Last I checked, demons are not citizens of our world. Oh no, I brutally dismembered, stabbed, and shot an alien, mutant, cyborg. Oh, the horror! I mean, come on. Come on now. Seriously. Seriously. They're fictional, non-existent characters. Let's get our heads out of our butts, please. I mean, I can somewhat understand being offended by killing other human beings in video games, or human-like characters in video games. I can understand maybe getting offended by that, if I'm playing devil's advocate. But if I'm killing fictional, non-existent creatures and characters in a video game, you have zero reason to be offended. Come on now, seriously. But anyways, yeah, woo! That's it. That's the old violent video games debate. Again. and I have a feeling sometime down the line, maybe a few months, maybe a year from now, we'll be having this discussion again, because people like beating a dead horse. But I ask you, I beg of you, I beg the mass media, I beg the population, I beg my viewers, yes, I am begging you, can we stop beating this dead horse? It's already bones. The flies have left the carcass, and the bones are just about ready to crumble and turn into dust. The point has been made, the counter-arguments have been made, the answers have been given. Can we move on, please? Anyways, this has been yet another video from the Gamertron, of my lovely YouTube channel, The Gamertron Show, and if you guys enjoyed this video, my commentary, the gameplay, if you liked the video in any way, shape, or form, please hit the like button. Hitting the like button helps you, helps me, helps everybody involved with the video if you hit the like button. And please leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts, feelings, and opinions on what I've discussed in this video. What do you think of violent video games? The stuff I talked about in violent video games? My opinions, your opinions? Let's hear them. Write your comments in the comment section below. I love reading comments. I don't get nearly enough comments. Please write a comment. And finally, I am the Gamertron. I love video games, and I love talking about video games. And if that's something that interests you, maybe consider supporting my channel by subscribing to me. Anyways, guys, this has been a video, and I will see you guys later.